Hello and welcome to EverydayPBL.com's Beginner's Guide to Project-Based Learning. This is Module 1 where we're going to take you through the beginning stages of the planning process for creating projects in project-based learning. Let's go ahead and start by taking a look at our PBL Starter Kit right there on the website. This is going to show you the resources that we have and that we need in order to do a good project-based unit. The first and foremost, we have our PLP form. The reason why we have such a lengthy form is because it's important for us to document what it is we're doing in this project. The idea behind projects is that you will create them in that first year, and then you're going to spend the next 5 or 6 years tweaking them and changing them. But you need to have a record there for posterity so you can remember what it is you did. Next, we have our district curriculum guide. It's a myth that we don't actually use the curriculum guides. While we may not be teaching what they have us teaching day 1 through 5, the TEKs that they ask us to teach, we try to stay true to. We try to stay to that scope and sequence that the district gives us. Next, some additional resources. We make sure you have your TEKs handy. It's going to be important because as you get into the scaffolding, there may be some skills that are on the foundation that you have to provide for, and also some opportunities for mastery and challenge. Have your CCRs and then the 6A's rubric, which is how we assess a good project. So let's go ahead and get into this PLP. You can download it right from this form by clicking on the picture there. We're going to focus on the skills, resource, and content here. So under the PLP header, skills, resource, and content, make sure we have our PBL. Yep, that's right. So we're going to be focusing here on this first page. So moving forward, we need to get our TEKs now. So let's go to the district curriculum website. You can find the SISD.net academics curriculum guides right here. I teach high school. I teach English. First grading period, English 1. It'll pop up your password as your email login, and here you go. Here we have our TEKs. And so when you look at this document here, let me scroll up and down, you're going to see your TEKs laid out for you in a column here. This is what you're teaching the first 9 weeks. Everything right here. That is our focus. That's what we're going to teach. We may not read the same stories as the rest of the district. We may not do the same activities as the rest of the district, but our focus maintains those TEKs. We will teach those TEKs. So let's go ahead and look at our PLP. Now, when you look at the PLP, you may not necessarily know what your topic or theme is going to be yet, but you're going to be able to fill out the rest of this information. I actually already have this filled out. So what you'll end up doing is you'll end up copy and pasting your TEKs, your skills, into the content standards box. Word-wise, sometimes they don't copy and paste so well. This will be what you teach. So step 1A, copy and paste the TEKs and the CCRs that are going to be encompassed in your unit. Make sure that the ones that you're covering in this unit are what the district wants you to. They do a really nice job of breaking them up, not giving you 37 readiness standards and 1 supporting standard. They have a really good balance, and typically they also do a nice job balancing it and breaking up and grouping the TEKs so that you're either covering them thematically or, in the case of history or math, chronologically. Alright, now think big picture, because you are going to have X amount of time to cover Y amount of TEKs. So go ahead and copy and paste over into your document. You may have to play around with some of the formatting. Alright, there we go. So now let's go ahead and take a look at our information sources. This is going to be step 1B. And here we're going to start looking at what do you have available to you to teach this unit. Are you going to use textbooks, web pages, regular books? Are they going to be researching? Do you have expendables that you can use, workbooks? Are there videos, speakers? Are there companies in our area that could help you teach this unit? try to be outside the box and think non-traditional sources. The more non-traditional your sources, the more authenticity you typically will have. Alright, so giving you the model for my unit. My unit is going to be a narrative unit. We're going to use Greek mythology to help us teach the narrative map. So my information and sources, we're going to use Edith Hamilton's mythology, and it's going to work really nice, and I'll show you the project context in a minute. But I also know that there are several web-based Greek mythology sites that are kind of like Cliff Notes for Greek mythology that are great. And then we'll also be incorporating Miss Valdez's digital media class to help us with some of the project ins and outs. Also, on top of that, we have this TEK here. It says Greek and Latin roots. Basically, we're supposed to be teaching Greek and Latin roots, and I've always struggled because I've never had a spot where that kind of fits in perfectly. Well, this project is going to give me that spot. So we're going to make sure that we bring those Greek and Latin roots into this project. Now, moving back to the website here, we're going to move on to step 1C, and that's the project context, authenticity, and adult connections. This part, we're going to ask, how are we going to make the learning relevant? What's the project going to look like? Who is going to see it and hear it? And what do these skills look like in the real world? That last question is really important because that's what we're driving at for authenticity. What does that skill look like in the real world? How can our students apply their learning to something that's real? So think pie in the sky, think big picture. If you could teach this skill any way you wanted, how would you do it? And then go from there. So moving back to the example, I had a long conversation with my co-teacher, my 10th grade counterpart, about how our students lack a lot of understanding about mythology. And she was spending a great deal of time before they read Antigone going over the ins and outs of Greek mythology. It got me thinking, we're doing this narrative unit. I normally read 3 or 4 short stories. Why don't I read 3 or 4 short stories based on mythology? And we do the same project we did last year, which was to build a board game based on the narrative plot and narrative structure of a story. But instead of using the short stories I've used, in years past, use these Greek mythology stories from Edith Hamilton's mythology. So the project idea was born. I'm going to take an old activity that we've done for a few years, and I'm going to switch it, and I'm going to change the audience, and I'm actually making it more real. Because when you talk about a real audience, it doesn't get much more real than across the hall from you later on this year. So, there you have your project context and your authenticity. There are things I could do later on to maybe make it a little more authentic, maybe bring in some companies that might be able to produce them in a more lifelike format. But for now, this will work. As you do projects over and over, you will find that you'll have avenues to increase the authenticity. Moving back to the site, let's go ahead and look at step 2. Step 2 is going to give us our enduring understanding. This is the big picture takeaway for your students. I always ask the question, 30 years from now, what is it we wanted our students to take away from this unit? So going back to the example, 30 years from now, I want my students to understand that plot devices and standard themes of literature are universal. There are ties in every piece of literature, be it Harry Potter or Moby Dick. There are things that make them similar, and I want my students to be able to recognize that. Moving on to step 3. Step 3 is an opportunity for us to pause and reflect. The questions, they have 4, are pretty simple. In what way does the project allow for multiple pathways to address the problem or challenge? Basically, it's asking, is there more than one way to go about doing this, or do you have a specific answer in mind? What types of core content knowledge, including standards, are your students going to learn to justify the time spent? Do you have a good blend of readiness standards or support standards? How do the sources require students to engage with relevant, important data? Where are they going to get the info from? Our students have a huge problem trying to find relevant information. So that may be something you're going to want to tackle. We'll talk more about that in Module 3. And then how is this project authentic? Are you placing the students in a scenario where they are the professional, or are they addressing a need in our community? Is it real, or are we faking it for school? How can we make it more real? So I've gone through and I've reflected and I've answered those questions. There's no right or wrong way for us to make this board game. The point of view and elements of fiction and expository essay writing, that's all very important. I know that because this is the first project, I'm going to have to give them a lot of resources, but that's okay. And then last, as I said before, we're doing it for school, but we are looking at a problem. Our sophomores last year really struggled with mythology. So if we can give them some of that background information, it's going to help them in the long run. So we are solving a problem. Alright, so we are done with Module 1. We are done with the first page. Notice it's stretched to the second page. That's not uncommon. You'll also notice we skipped school-wide learning outcomes and skills. There's a reason we did that. Not every school has school-wide learning outcomes. That's going to be something you want to address with your administrator and ask them, what are our outcomes? New Tech San Antonio uses communication, written and oral, content knowledge, collaboration, and work ethic. Those are our 5 learning outcomes. And those are going to change, I think. So that's why I kind of left that blank. You want to talk to your administrator about that and find out what they want the learning outcomes of your school to be.